Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review is from 1970, and it's Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion, which is a bit of a mouthful of a title, by Elio Petri from 1970, starring Gian Maria Volonte. This is the Criterion Region B Blu-ray, which is just out. And it's Criterion Spine number 682 for people counting at home. There's a lot to get to in this film. I'm not the smartest film reviewer on YouTube, so I will attempt to explain just what the hell's going on in this film. Directed by Petri, who sadly died at the age of 53. He did a little bit of everything. He started with Assassino with Mastrioni, did 10th Victim, Property is No Longer a Theft. In this film, it's heavily inspired by Kafka. There's a Kafka quote at the end. I would say it's also heavily inspired by The Trial by Kafka, and also Orson Welles' film adaptation of The Trial, 1961. But it's almost like a reverse version of The Trial. So we start with Volonte, who doesn't have a moustache or a beard, which is a little bit off-putting at the start because we're so used to seeing him, certainly in Dollars films, with a moustache and smoking marijuana. But he's clean shaven in this, so it does take a little bit to get used to. And he's standing outside a house. He goes up to this apartment. There's a woman in the apartment, and she asks him how he's going to kill her this time. So already our interest is piqued. I should say the opening credits are just on a black screen, and then we get one of Morricone's more famous themes for the film. There's not a lot of music in the film, there's just really 2 or 3 themes. This starts and goes quite long into the opening scene. So they go to bed, and not so much a spoiler alert, but he kills her. And then he cleans up, has a shower, gets dressed, goes off to work, but it just so happens that he is the head of the homicide squad in the police, and he's just had the promotion to the political squad, or the political bureau, investigating political crimes. Now, I do think this is a film that perhaps 50 years later, and not being an Italian, there's parts of it that I just don't appreciate. At the time this was filmed, late 69, there was a lot of political unrest amongst Italian youth. There was lots of protests, there was bombings going on, and general unrest. There's also a subtle thing going on with some of the accents that are being used. Volonte during certain scenes uses more of a Sicilian dialogue and accent, which to a non-Italian we're just not going to get, but obviously to Italian audiences that means something. I mean, I still think there's lots to enjoy in this film. It is a film that I think requires rewatches. I think it's just going to get better and better. It's 115 minutes long. I thought it was a little too long, but if I gave halves, I would give it a 4.5, but I don't, so I gave it 4 out of 5. But there's so much going on, and again, if you get an idea of the background of what was going on in Italy at the time, I think that kind of enriches it as well. But I still think 50 years separated from the making of it, it's still a wonderful film. So it starts, initially you think this is about him not wanting to get caught, but then in reverse trial form, he kind of wants to get caught. But the whole film is pretty much about authority and government, being in control. He has an amazing speech about how, they need to repress everybody, and repression is the way forward, and then it becomes, essentially a fascist diatribe, which is exactly what the youth are revolting against. And it goes down, it becomes more and more absurd as he desperately wants to prove his guilt, whereas obviously Joseph K in the trial wants to prove his innocence of a crime that he doesn't even know what he's accused of. And this one, Volonte's character, who doesn't have a name through the film, he wants to confess, he wants to show how the system works, but the system in turn pretty much shows itself how it works. If you're in power, if you are part of the system, doesn't matter what you do, you're going to get away with it. He tries his best through various plot devices, which I'm not going to spoil, because as a film you're just going to have to watch yourself and enjoy yourself. Again, very much like Orson Welles' The Trial, it's probably not going to be for everybody. Volonte himself isn't a particularly nice character, but because it's Volonte, if you're familiar with any of his roles, he just is so committed and so obsessed, and it's a typical Volonte performance, and you'll know what that means. You can't take your eyes off him. Again, it's perhaps a little long, and we are going to have to, I'm going to have to watch it again to get more nuances of it, but it's a sensational film. It's Petri's most famous one, probably. The Criterion edition, this is a really good Criterion edition. It's from a 4K restoration. There's a 90-minute documentary on Petri from 2005. There's a 60-minute documentary about Volonte, who of course was really politically active in the left, so he's actually playing a character that in his personal life would obviously be standing against. So that's a 60-minute interview. There's a 20-minute interview from 2010 with Morricone about the music, which, because it's Morricone, it's fascinating. There's an interview with film scholar Camilla Zamboni from 2013, which is excellent as well, because she again gives a bit of a background of the political situation in Italy at the time. The film did very well at Cannes, and it really made Petri's name, but obviously sadly he died at the age of 53. Again, you get a nice booklet. It's a stunningly shot film. All the kind of police work. There's Volonte. I think that is a middle finger. It's the days of beating confessions out of people, forcing them to drink salt water. Obviously, at the end, it's quite absurdly funny when all the police and all the bosses are trying to pretty much beat a confession of innocence out of Volonte rather than out of guilt. It looks beautiful. It sounds great. Again, it's a classic Morricone score, even though there's not a lot of music actually in the film. It just appears here and there. The whole subplot with the woman that he murdered, who's played by Florinda Balkan, who again's been in a lot of Italian exploitation films. When she says, how are you going to kill me today? It's because they have a habit, which we see in flashbacks. We see parts of his relationship with her in flashbacks. They get turned on by recreating crime scenes together. There's a whole kind of wonderfully subversive subplot between the two of them, and recreating crime scenes, crime photos. But then that relationship changes as well. It's the whole kind of image of masculinity gets turned on its head. The whole thing gets turned on its head because, again, you think you're watching a kind of giallo about a man who commits a crime and then is trying to hide the crime, and obviously he works in the police, so it's like that's a nice turn as well. But then of course it turns on its head when he actually wants to prove that he's guilty, and nobody in the system will actually listen to him because he is a citizen above suspicion. And that's kind of the whole point. It's a statement about authority. It's about police brutality. It's about the brutality of the state. It's about how, depending on who you are, you get away with stuff, which, strangely enough, is still relevant today. There's parts of it that are just fantastic. There's parts of it that, again, like I said, could probably be trimmed a little, but overall, it's a wonderful film. I would highly recommend the Criterion release. Sometimes there's Criterions that are better than others, but this one, the extras, there's a ton of extras. Like I said, it still has a point, and like I said, 50 years later, we might, certainly to a non-Italian, perhaps lost some of the nuance of the situation at the time, but it's still got plenty to say about the world we live in now. And I've got a feeling that's maybe why Criterion kind of upgraded it to Blu-ray, because obviously it was a DVD in the collection before, because it's still relevant. And if you want an example of why Volonte is just like so magnetic on the screen, you can't take your eyes off him, this is a brilliant example of Volonte at the height of his powers. It's an example of Morricone at the height of his powers. It's just a wonderful example of amazing Italian cinema. Again, there's lots of films from the 70s or whatever that aren't really relevant, and they're kind of caught in a kind of time capsule of that was the time and that was, but the themes in this film will always be relevant, because technically people in power tend to get away with stuff just because they're people in power. He has this amazing speech when he starts in the political bureau that is almost like a fascist rally, and as I've forgotten her name already, Camelia Zamboni says in her little featurette, there's actually a shot of Petri in the crowd asleep, because he's making his own point about his speech, just about repression is the way forward, and repression is civilization, repression is our vaccine against these people that are having different opinions than ours, these people that want change. It's an amazing film, and one that I would highly recommend, and one that probably requires multiple viewings, and it's one that might end up on my favourites list, or my favourite 150 if I update it this year, if I watch it again, because it's, at times it's jaw-droppingly good. So that's The Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion, which might be one of the longer film titles that I have in my collection. I'd highly recommend picking it up. This is a Region B, like I said. So let me know in the comments below if you've seen Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion and what you thought of it. And hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.